Thank you. Good to see you.
Okay, we are now live, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. We're going to start 2 whole minutes early, but as a reminder, any bills that don't come out by tomorrow don't come out. So it is time to fish or cut bait, committee members. We've got to make some decisions. We're going to start with S1, which is the first introduced bill. And Ellen is here. Greg, you are here. You haven't been in to talk about this one. So I'm going to let you go first, and then we'll go to Dylan, and then we'll go to Ellen, if that works.
Yeah, that'd be great, Senator.
Okay.
So Mary Jo Kraleski and Jake Marin were in on Tuesday, and they were speaking for the commission. They're more subject matter experts on this. I just wanted to be involved in this discussion because I wasn't sure where things shook out after Tuesday. And there's a couple of things we do need to, we would like to have in the bill, a couple of things we'd like to have changed in the bill.
Okay.
That we think are important. So I can go through those 3 or 2 things really with you if you'd like.
Ellen's got her hand up. Ellen, do you already have those?
Yes, apologies. I took the PUC's edits because I think the committee approved them at the last meeting. So they are in the draft that are draft 6.1 that is posted on the website. Only has a few changes, which are largely the PUC's recommended changes, and then a change to the feasibility study.
Okay, and they wanted to put out the separate section M, if I'm remembering, move some things down there. And
right, so there's a change in the date, and then moving some of the language out of the avoided cost language down to its own subsection, I believe.
Yep, that's it.
okay, is that okay? We'll see when we get there. And Dylan, I promised you equal time when we took this up last time. So have you got anything you'd like to chime in?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Dylan Zwicky with Leonine Public Affairs here on behalf of Stored Solar. I shared an email with the committee yesterday that includes some proposed language that I think attempts to address some of the concerns raised by members of the committee in previous discussions. The language, the committee has contemplated shortening the term from 10 years to a shorter time period. What we, and also simultaneously, Senator Hardy, I think, had raised the idea of adding some teeth to the feasibility study language. So we actually took both of those ideas, combined them, and drafted some language that hopefully the committee will find amenable. The language basically bifurcates the 10-year period into 2 5-year periods. The first 5-year period would run from 2022, when the current contract expires, until 2027. And then there is a separate clause that would enable a further 5-year extension if the owners of the plant are able to demonstrate to the PUC that they have made meaningful progress towards utilizing the excess thermal energy generated by the plant. They would have to demonstrate that that agreement is not contingent upon financing and only contingent upon securing the relevant applicable state and federal permits for the project. So functionally, the way it would work is they would get a 5-year extension with all of the conditions laid out in the bill as it currently stands. And then if they are moving towards developing a project or have developed a project, to take the waste heat, whether that's a wood chip, a wood pellet facility, or another agreement with a third party, the owners of the plant could bring that project to the PUC, and the PUC could make a determination that, yes, in fact, this project has been developed and is operational, or it is on the way to being operational and only needs to secure those permits. And then from the point at which the PUC makes that determination, that would sort of say, yes, you get your second 5-year term. If the project does not get to be developed within 2 years of that date, then all of the arrangement set up in this bill would cease to exist within 3 months after that 2-year period. So we felt like the 5 and 5 worked well from the perspective of really the incentive is on the owners of the plant to develop a project as soon as possible. For whether it's the Vermont Wood Pellet Company or any other third party who's coming in to utilize that waste heat. If they come in at the end of the first 5-year period and there's only the option of another 5 years, that may not make the project economically viable. So the onus and the incentive is on the owners of the plant to really get someone in sooner than that 5 years. So you could get 8 or perhaps 9 years of a cogeneration agreement in place that would really make that investment worthwhile. At the same time, we felt like the 5 years initially made sense because it does take time to develop these projects, and we wanted to not end up in a scenario where if the committee said, well, you get 3 years or 4 years, and we were right bumping up against that time frame, but not quite ready to have the PUC make that determination. We wanted to give some runway to developing the project. So we felt 5 and 5 made sense. It adds teeth to the feasibility study. And frankly, I'm not necessarily sure whether the feasibility study language would be necessary because this is a much more concrete tie to an extended operation of the plant to make sure that there is, in fact, a project being developed to take that excess heat.
We can't hear you, Madam Chair.
Oh, you can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay, Senator Saratkin.
Thank you, Dylan. I really appreciate the proposal. I think it moves in the right direction. I am a little concerned, and you started to answer it with going out 5 years. Is it really necessary 5 years before you know what you can find? I mean, you say you want to do it as quickly as possible. So I'm focused on that. And my understanding is if you went to the PUC, you could still continue to operate if they believed you were on a track to a project that makes this a more amenable source of energy. So why wouldn't we want to move it like to 2 or 3 years? Why wouldn't that give you enough time to know what's going on?
2 or 3 years very well may be enough. And I think from my conversations with the owners, their intent is to move forward as quickly as possible. It is in their interests to do so. But we wanted to make sure that there was a reasonable time frame in case, as most folks I think are aware, it takes time to develop projects. There are always hurdles. And we wanted to avoid a situation where they were making meaningful progress towards that date, but had not, secured financing or, completed all of the engineering, but such that they could come to the PUC and ask for that determination. And so that's where we landed on the 5 years, but appreciate that the committee may want to see a shorter time frame. We felt like 5 years was enough of a lead time, but again, the real incentive is for us to move faster than that because it does increase the viability of finding an off-taker for that heat if they're going to be around for more than 5 years. I personally find it hard to believe that anyone would want to develop a project that 5 years out, they're not sure they're going to be able to get that heat. So I think it's extraordinarily likely that it will be sooner than that.
Just a follow-up.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
As a follow-up, I know it's somewhat of an unfair question for you or even your client to answer, but what do you see in your language that would stop you from coming back if you weren't there in 5 years and get the legislature to change the law?
In other words, if we were some way down the road of developing a project, but we needed another year, or I mean,
Or worse,
obviously,
worse, you're nowhere near getting another project and you just want to get more time operating the same way.
I'm
And I
not
think
sure there's
that's one of
anything.
the things that the committee wants to get to, either come up with another project or let's move on. We just don't want to keep dealing with this.
I understand and appreciate that, Senator. As the language lays out, assuming that there were no future legislative changes, at the end of the 5 years, if we have not demonstrated to the PUC that there is meaningful progress, the whole arrangement goes away. And I appreciate that some entity, whether it's the current owners or any other entity, could come and make an ask of the legislature in the future to change the underlying statute. I'm not sure there's anything that
Right.
you could put in language that would prohibit that. I think what you're signaling, if you accept this language, is that the intent of this legislature is for there to be a 5-year extension, notwithstanding a project that takes the heat, and 10 years if you include the heat. I think that language demonstrates it, but I'm not really sure if that necessarily answers your question. I appreciate where you're coming from, but I can't really offer.
I appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Okay, I'm probably had a different concept. I'm willing to accept that it might not be possible to find a project to use that heat. I think we want a reasonable effort, but given the location, given the time it's taken McNeil to hook up somebody to their heat, it might not be possible. And I think we're saying we'll give you 5 years, then you come back to the PUC and they're going to look at everything, including whether or not you've made reasonable progress on that. But now what I'm understanding is if all you've got's 5 years, it's going to be almost, if you don't have the guarantee of a full 10 years, who's going to sign on to use your heat? And there were a lot of conditions that the pellet guy needed. He needed to be able to use your heat, but he also needed to use your environmental scrubbers. And if you're going to be shut down, it might, time is money. They might not be willing to even start going through the feasibility. So there's a rock and a hard place, I think, at play here. I had Senator Pearson and then Senator Bray.
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning. Probst was kind enough to let me come back, and they're flexible. So I'm catching up, but I'm looking at the language you sent us, and in my mind, I've been thinking of a shorter timeline than 5 years for precisely the reason the chair articulates, which is that I don't think there's a realistic timeline for us to demand that something be built. But I do think it's more realistic or hopeful that within a 2-year extension, so 3 years from now, there could be a contract, there could be MOUs, there could be, engineering done. And so I guess I'm wondering how, Dylan, you react to that and how committee feels about, I think we should just get rid of the idea that something's up and running in any kind of short time frame, but that it's promised. And because we've been around this a long time, and basically from a lot of metrics, the plant should be shut down unless there really is some co-benefit here. And so that's where I'm leaning is not in my opinion, false hope that there's something up and running, but that we have a tighter timeline with a deadline of getting a real project lined up and in the works, but underway, I guess.
Originally, and Ellen, you can correct me, we were talking about a feasibility study. Is that, and now we're talking about having something up and running. is what's in the bill? Is it?
Right, so
I
in
thi-
the bill currently is a provision for the owner to do a feasibility study, but I think the amendment, this proposed amendment could
This one.
either supplant that or they could work in conjunction.
But we've gone from a feasibility study, because last year we told ACCD they had to do it and they got caught up in COVID. And said they couldn't do it. So this year we've said, okay, owner, you're going to do it. And now we're saying, well, it's not just the feasibility. We want you to have some engineering or an MOU within 3 years rather than 5. It's, I suppose we can always extend that. Because it's possible the wood chip guys will be moving right along and then find out, that they can't get their smoke plugged into the smokestack and that'll die. So then you got to go out and start with shrimp farming or something else. And is it our, and there were a lot of other things. There was a whole lot of discussion about putting all the loggers on welfare and shutting the whole thing down last week. I think when we started, we were talking about meaningful progress towards using that thermal energy. And we were talking somewhere within 5 years. I guess is reasonable progress a study, a feasibility study, or is reasonable progress if what I'm concerned about is we're going to say to them, if you can't find something that works, then we're going to shut you down.
Yeah.
Okay, is that what you, even though it might not be possible to find something that works?
10 years ago, we had the same debate, and people had the same concerns and said, geez, it would really be good if you could co-locate something. And, so shame on us if we just keep doing this. It only makes sense actually to operate if there's a co-location, and we should figure that out or cut our losses.
Okay, Senator Bray.
Two things. One is I think the choice is less draconian, right? We're not shutting them down. They're just not going to receive the preferable rate. So if they can operate in the marketplace without special pricing, then they can continue to operate. So
I think we're shutting them down.
Well, I haven't really heard testimony that I'm not doubting you, but I don't remember any testimony to tell me that if they lose that differential, that they'll be shut down. They would still own, for instance, if they ended up generating and retaining the RECs themselves, anyway, there's different ways that the contract could go at the end of without the pricing support that's built into the current contract. So I would like to know. I don't want. It may be that we're not really shutting them down. We're just making it a little more challenging. Maybe it's impossible. I don't know. The other thing is, I did talk to a forester who's been in forestry for 45 years. He operates over on that side. He lives on the other side, on the eastern side of the state, and I have a great deal of respect for him. He's probably one of the most thoughtful, progressive foresters I know. And I think he's probably very much in tune with what a Natural Resources and Energy Committee, for instance, might think about all this stuff. And he was on the Biomass Energy Development Working Group. He's a senior forester on national panels, all sorts of stuff. Anyway, he encouraged me to try to find a way to keep this facility operating, because if there is no market for low-grade wood, his concern was that it would not be harvested. And sort of as a last stand, no bad pun intended, people would tend to move to cuts that are less healthy for the forest. For instance, taking out higher grade wood, leaving behind the low grade wood because there is no market, and in essence, disimproving the forest by sort of getting the money out while they can. So he said, if you can keep this going or find some other market for that wood, you're actually helping forestry in the state of Vermont for the eastern side of the state. And for me, it was persuasive because I trust his judgment and his 4 decades of experience.
And I think that goes along with the discussion we had last week about if we're going to shut this, if the plant shuts down, there is no market and these bad things happen. And there was talk about little homes and finding other uses. But that's our problem, not the owner of the plant. So we want him to do thermal, but we're going to, if it's not just, whether or not they shut down or how long they can operate in the market is one thing. But if they do go, the reason we've been subsidizing the rate is because of the advantages in the forestry industry. And that's the balance we've been trying to work out. So if we're going to require them to find a way to use the thermal energy, are we going to be working equally hard to try and find other uses for the low grade lumber? Because if we don't, we've created another problem. So something to think about.
Can I add one last quick note? It just, I appreciate all the things you're saying, and I'm just a little concerned that we're not particularly good at helping shape markets for things. Like, I don't know why, there's appears to be very little value to this Vermont wood as lumber at the moment. We're not sawing that much of it. We're not building a lot of houses using it, as best I know. So I'm leery about trying to find the legislature intervening to find another use. My sense is we're finding sort of a glide path out of the subsidy.
Okay. But if that results in the plant shutting down, then we have the problem with no market for the low grade wood. Whether we intended to shut down or not, that problem will still exist. But I think we were kicking the can down the road 5 years. Maybe we would want the feasibility study in 2 and meaningful progress in 5. Is that something people could live with?
Say that again.
Say a feasibility study in 2 to 3 years and then meaningful progress towards finding in 5. Does that work? And then use Dylan's, if they do that, then they get the extra 5. I didn't think that's what we started out with, Senator McDonald.
There are few reasons to operate this plant. Certainly not from a cost of electricity point of view and a climate point of view right now. But since a year ago, it has become clear that the plant that burned in New Hampshire that took hundreds of truckloads a day isn't going to be rebuilt. This plant takes 30 truckloads a day. And there's no provision in the bill, the proposal before us, that the subsidy paid by Vermont ratepayers to keep the plant going to employ loggers and truckers is going to go to Vermont loggers and truckers. The New Hampshire has chosen not to subsidize wood burning plants for this purpose because it doesn't make economic sense. This plant would not be in existence today if we had not exempted it from its cleanliness regulations that we call for. It has an exemption. It does not have to obey what other plants do. And I think the members of this committee and perhaps our colleagues remain open to a way to operate the plant that makes some changes to mitigate some of these things. I had a conversation with Commissioner Snyder and asked him if he would think of some creative ways to ensure that it's the Vermont loggers and truckers who would be selected to produce for this plant if it were to stay open, not to have a race to the bottom with the previous folks that provided hundreds of truckloads a day to the New Hampshire plant. And he just said that he was interested and would get back to us and we would have a discussion on it.
Well, if he doesn't get back to us this afternoon.
A 2-year extension, which I think Dylan knows is really a 3-year and 3-month extension, is more than adequate for those who would seek to find thermal work, perhaps come up with an outline on how to use it productively for pellets, and perhaps with the hard work of the Commissioner of Forest and Parks, a method to get any subsidies to the very state that's paying the subsidy would be an adequate time to put together some progress. And I reluctantly last year supported this bill for the reasons that it had to do with our forest products and the dilemma people were in. And a 2-year and 3 months, a 3-year and 3 months period, which a 2-year extension would provide, would be an adequate opportunity to jumpstart that. I don't see myself, if there's progress being made to on any of the above or anything new, that we extend again. But there's no urgency if you put out there 5 years and then pass over the decision on whether to extend to people outside of our jurisdiction. So I'm not opposed to extensions, and I don't want to sit around for 7 years and 3 months to then have a future PUC look at what's been worked on and make a decision on our behalf. So that's my concern, and I've been the biggest critic of this in the Finance Committee for the last couple of years, and I understand the wisdom of Dylan's agreeing to take a extension in order for them to work on this, but we shouldn't be giving up our responsibilities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So I've got a couple, but shorter than 5 years. This contract doesn't run out till October 2022. So we got another year. Okay, Dylan.
Yes, just if I may, appreciate where Senator McDonald is coming from in terms of adding on or including the time between now and 2022 as part of the extension. What I would just say is that we don't know what the PUC's rate will be until they determine it. It's quite possible that it is different than the rate that is currently in statute. And so from a planning and agreement perspective, it would be very challenging to move forward, even at the base levels with, whether it's Vermont Wood Pellet Company or any other off-taker for the heat, until we know what that arrangement looks like. There are a number of other considerations that this bill lays out, such as the economic dispatch, that could very significantly impact the type of off-taker for that heat. And so to imply that we would be able to start that planning process before we know what the new contract looks like, I think does not recognize what the work of this committee has done, which is that it may look dramatically different than what it currently does. And I appreciate that the committee is seeking a shorter time frame than perhaps 5 years. I would push back a little bit and just say it sounds like the intent is to get the owner to develop a project on that site. Give them the time and the runway to do that. These are complex projects. And we won't know what the rate looks like until 2022. And I think the language that we've drafted does provide more than just meaningful progress. We have to demonstrate financing, engineering, a real package that is either already constructed or well on its way to being completed. The only thing that it would not be contingent on is the state and federal permits. So we're not talking about an MOU. We're not talking about letters of intent. This is real and significant progress that we would have to demonstrate to the PUC to get that second 5 years. And again, it is in our incentive to do it. It's in our interest to do it sooner than that, but we would greatly appreciate having that 5-year period, recognizing it may come in sooner than that.
Okay, so your position is that whatever we decide on extension, that it start at the date the new contract begins, that to count this next year and a half, whatever it is, isn't fair because you are not going to know what your rates and conditions are going forward until such time as the PUC has met and told you their terms. Then you know what you're going to need to do, but you're saying you are going to come in with something much more advanced than a feasibility study. That
yes. Yeah.
You are coming in with some very defined plans. You may not have all your financing in a line. You will or will not have your state permits.
We would have our financing. The agreement would have that we would have to show to the PUC is that financing would have to be in place. The only thing outstanding would be state permits because those are kind of out of our hands. We can't guarantee that the state will provide permits. And again, it explicitly states that if the project hasn't been developed within and is operational within 2 years of the PUC saying, we've reviewed your package, it looks like it's a real deal. Within 2 years, if it hasn't been developed for any reason, the obligation for the must-take purchase on behalf of the utilities goes away entirely. And just to go back to
go ahead.
Senator Bray's question about the viability absent this type of an arrangement, my understanding from our conversations with the owners is that they do not feel that without a must-take arrangement similar to one that is in place today, that the market would work for them. And they would more than likely shut that plant down. They've been very clear on what their plans are. And I think it testified to that, but apologies if that was not clear to the committee.
Okay, that's what I recollect hearing, but I'm not sure where. Greg, you had.
Yeah, I haven't seen your proposal, Dylan, but okay, so just from our perspective, it takes us about a year to go through one of these proceedings, and it costs a lot of money to do. To do that for a 5-year period, it's kind of on the cusp of not worth it. What I would suggest if you're considering going down this road is to merely extend their existing contract for another 2 or 3 years. And if they can come back with this, whatever this feasibility thing is, I haven't seen it, then, they get those 2 or 3 years at this rate, so they can plan. It doesn't interrupt their planning. They have the same exact rate for the next 2 or 3 years. And then if they come back and demonstrate whatever they're supposed to demonstrate, then we proceed to the actual hearing on their rates for a 7-year period, let's say. Because it really doesn't make sense for us to do, a hearing for a 5-year period. It's a year and it's a lot of money. So I just want to throw that out there.
Good. Thank you. Dylan.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that, Greg. I think what I've been trying to articulate is that because, under the current arrangement, it's 10.5 cents a kilowatt hour for the hours that they are online. They run virtually 24/7, 365. They shut down for 2, I believe, week-long periods for cleaning and refueling, but otherwise the plant is operational. That's the kind of current structure. The bill, as introduced this year and as modified by the committee, lays out the potential for a significantly different arrangement where they may be down for 3 or 4 months because of the economic dispatch arrangement, to take into account some of the ratepayer concerns that the Department of Public Service had advocated for. And we're okay with the language that is currently included in the bill, but the nature of a significantly different arrangement may be such that we can't even really begin those conversations. The owners are having conversations with potential off-takers of that heat today, but they won't know. I mean, to use the wood pellet example, if we're down for 3 months or 2 months in the spring or summer months due to the economic dispatch provisions in the bill that would be in place for the new rate, that may not work for the new entity. And so we couldn't go so far as to get financing in place and a contract for construction in place if, once the PUC then does go through their process and lay out the framework for the new arrangement, if that doesn't work for the off-taker. So we need to know going into that arrangement what the structure and framework is.
Okay. Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dylan, you do a good job for your client. But every business would like an entirely predictable universe. But the fact is your client bought a plant that has 2 years left on its contract and said to us point blank, it wasn't that risky because there's a decommissioning fund that comes with the plant. So, we can't have it both ways. Yeah, sure, you'd like the predictability. I actually think Mr. Faber has put his finger right on it. We can extend the current lay of the land, give you a few years, even though so far no owner has been apparently able to come up with a plan, but give you a few years to come up with more than just a sketch of a plan, and then bring the case back. I think what would be the problem with the predictability that during that time you'd get the current rate? Full well the PUC likes the stable option of your power. You've still got the RECs. You got a lot coming from you from ratepayers on this one. Short of getting everything you want, what is the problem with that predictability in the short term, and figuring out if you can come up with a solution? That seems pretty smart to me.
I certainly don't. I don't think we would have any concerns with extending for a period of time beyond 2022 under the current arrangement. The bill actually, as it's introduced, does provide for if the PUC were perhaps taking longer than anticipated to come up with a new rate, it does sort of have a bridge provision in there. So I don't see any issues with that. Again, I just go back to, and I haven't consulted with my client about Greg's proposition, but I can imagine that the economic dispatch component of the bill as a valuable tool to lowering the subsidy from Vermont ratepayers to this plant could become problematic for the type of project. If it's a shrimp farm, maybe it's fine during the summer months. If there's dispatch for the plant not to be operational and therefore not producing heat. If it's a pellet facility, maybe not. I don't know the nuances of who might be able to use that heat. So all I'm saying is that it could, and appreciate that you can't always get what you want, but I'm just highlighting for the committee some of the functional challenges of not knowing what the arrangement will look like in trying to bring as concrete of a package to the PUC or to the legislature for that matter, until the PUC has made that framework.
I'm sorry to, Madam Chair, I have a question for you about your intention here, because I probably should get back to approps. Do you mean for us to vote?
We have until tomorrow to get these bills out. So my intention is to get them out. I thought we would have Ellen walk us through the present draft, and when we get to sections, we have Dylan's proposal, and we can decide what we would like to put in there for the extension. I am hearing, I think that if we are not going to do a full 10 years, the PUC, because of the cost and time involved, says it's not worth doing a full blown rate case. All right. I also hear Dylan saying, yeah, but we do, you know, if you're going to make us shut down for 2 months in the summer, that makes a whole lot of difference to the economic viability of a pellet plant if they can't produce for 2 or 3 months a year. That these things, you know, get complicated. So the more insecurity there is on his side, the harder it's going to be to get an uptaker. On the other hand, we don't want to be dawdling around and find out that 10 years from now, I'm just surprised that McNeil hasn't hooked anyone up yet. These aren't easy. I mean, so we're trying to find and then we got the timber industry, and it sounds like all the foresters are saying we need to find a way to dispose of this softwood, that at least in the present market, nobody's buying for timber, or if they're buying the timber, I went by a pile down near Rygate the other day, and it's about 20 feet tall of just branches that make a giant bonfire. That's going to go somewhere, or it may turn into a fire hazard. We've had drought conditions the last few summers. We are not, in this climate change, immune to forest fires. So we got to walk our way through this. And I think we all would like, I think, to do more and to get more surety. But we've got to decide what we can realistically live with, I guess. And what I'm hearing is starting with the 22 end date, doing an extension, and probably having them come back in 2 years with a feasibility study. And then they could tell us, okay, it's feasible to put the wood plant there. We can plumb them into our air scrubbers, and we can, we've got enough electricity and we can get the wood there. However, if you don't let us operate for 3 months of the year, the viability goes away because they can't live with being shut down. We could do a shrimp farm. Depending on how close it got to 30 there's Maine shrimp that need it cold, but they're little. Then we grow those in the winter, and there's Gulf shrimp, and there's probably several in between. And I don't know what temperature they need. And can you maintain that if you're shut down for, where, I don't know. But that might be the best option. So before they make any commitment or go to any expense engineering, that we know what the trade-offs are. That's my best thought at this point. Senator Hardy.
Oh, that's Senator Bray coughing. I'm sorry. Can we just go through the bill as you suggested, Madam Chair, and then because I have a list, and it seems to me like there are a bunch of things that none of us are going to get everything we want, including Dylan, and I think he knows that. That's what he's paid for, and we're all trying to find a way to make this work and be able to sleep at night. If Ellen can go through the bill, there are some various things I've written down that people have suggested that maybe we could insert in the bill and see if they all meld together.
And I think most of them are probably in there now, but we'll see. And I'm hoping, because we're amending the base law, that we'll see some of the other provisions that are in the law, like forestry practices, that we haven't seen.
Right, Ellen, you did a strike all with, there's some yellow in it, so that's helpful.
There she goes. Okay. Ellen, why don't you walk us through this?
Sure. So posted on your website today is draft 6.1. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a typo on the second line already. This draft primarily just includes the recommendations that came from the PUC at your last meeting.
Okay.
So, but we can look at all of the language. So
yep, that would be good.
So section 1, which is almost the entirety of this bill, is amending section 8009 of Title 30. So as used in this section, we have these definitions that are used here. So we have baseload renewable power, and then baseload renewable power portfolio requirement, which means the actual output of a baseload renewable power from an in-state woody biomass plant that was commissioned prior to September 30th, 2009, and has a nominal capacity of 2.5 megawatts and was in service as of January 1, 2021.
I assume that there's only one plant that meets that definition?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay, that's like the furniture manufacturer that's located in the northern part of Vermont. Yes, okay. And I think we've done some of those for IBM.
Carefully tailored. That's a carefully tailored definition.
Carefully tailored. But if anybody else met that definition.
Sure. So
okay. Now I'm getting things that says that one of our next witnesses has to leave by 3. And it's the drafter who will walk us through local option taxes. So what time is it now? Which one of these machines? Okay, I'm going to give this maybe 10 more minutes. Then we're going to go to local options, because that's another one that got sent to us that, no, this came, Faith, local options came to us from another committee. Is that correct?
No, it's ours first.
It's ours first. All right, then we have to do it if we're going to. So we will walk through that at 2:30. And if we have to, we'll come back to this. You might want to bring your sleeping bags for Friday night. We've never gone as far as having to move the clock back at midnight. That's what you do on Saturday night. Because I believe the Constitution says we can't meet on the Sabbath, right? There are stories about the house. Okay. let
So then
us,
we have a definition of biomass that's used. You're just fixing the cross-reference in there.
okay.
And then starts the more substantive provisions on page 2. So notwithstanding 8004 and 8005, starting on November 1, 2012, each Vermont retail electricity provider shall purchase the provider's pro rata share of the baseload renewable power portfolio requirement, which shall be based on the total Vermont retail kilowatt hour sales of all such providers for the previous calendar year. The obligation created by this subsection shall cease on November 1, 2032. So this is the sort of primary obligation that we're talking about.
Okay, and that says, that doesn't talk about it doesn't specify a rate, right?
Right. So this is
This
just
is what the
creating
board will
obligation.
decide, the rate, the amount, and the terms.
Right. This is just requiring the purchase of the pro rata share by the utilities.
Yeah, okay. And the first thing we need to deal with is this is a 10-year extension. And that's the first decision point. I don't think anyone is looking at 10 years. The most I've heard is 5.
Well, I think that would depend on what we decide for the
Okay,
study versus the Dylan's proposed amendment. And
Dylan's proposed amendment. Yeah.
so that would go in later in the bill.
Okay.
And then we could come back and change this based on the decisions we make later.
Okay, so let's keep going.
Well, right. There's a few you just talked about a bunch of different proposals. Dylan's original proposal was going to amend this subsection B potentially. So I think if you've discussed a lot of different proposals in the last half hour, and all of them would have different potential changes that would affect the rest of these sections. So
I can't read Dylan's on my phone. There it goes.
Well-
Okay, so Dylan said, notwithstanding the subdivision 1 of this subsection, okay, shall extend to and cease on November 1st, 2032, if the commission, in response to a petition from the, baseload owner, project utilizing the project. So basically what his proposal is they will come back in 5 years with something more advanced than a feasibility study. They've got design, they will have everything but their state permits. And if they do that, then they get the second 5 years. So they have the guarantee, which I now see would be necessary to get anybody to talk to them, because why would you build a pellet plant if you weren't guaranteed you were going to be able to run it for any amount of time? I assume they don't get built for $1,000. So his proposal is that they agree to these things within 5 years, and we can change that. And if they do, then they get the 2032. And then there's the discussion of, do we just extend their present contract out 2 or 3 years, tell them to come back with a feasibility study, and then have the PUC make their decisions. Now, it will limit on knowing, what the dispatch is going to be and stuff, the feasibility of some plants, but when the PUC makes their final decision, they'll know if it's feasible to put a wood pellet plant there with the plant being shut down 3 months of the year, or it's not, and they can make that the decision based on all the criteria at that point. Or they might decide to go for a shrimp farm or haberdasher or whoever else shows up that could work for a couple months off. So Senator Hardy.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Madam Chair, if we can sort of meld the two together a little bit so that we had what Mr. Faber was saying about the 2 to 3 year extension while they come up with a plan. And I guess I would like to see a little bit more than just a feasibility study if we're delaying this and giving them an extra 2 to 3 years with their current rate. So it's basically what Mr. Faber was suggesting about keeping the current rate while Dylan and his buddies come up with more than just a feasibility plan. They have to come up with what they are proposing in order to extend the contract with the state, or the good deal with the state. And then all of that information can be used for the PUC to determine the next rates for 7 years or whatever we agree to be the timeline. And
I think I was just calling it a feasibility study, but I don't think anybody's had to cite a water filtration plant at one point and be told it, before I could get a final permit, we had to do $300,000 worth of engineering studies, which that was 30 years ago. So that was probably be worth double that right now. And it was peel your taxpayer dollars. You don't want to invest that until unless there's some unforeseen problem that pops up, you're going to get it. So I think a study that says, look, if we're open, running 12 months of the year, we can do wood chips. If we're only going to be running 9 months of the year, then we can do this and this, because but I don't think any company's going to do engineering studies or any kind of detailed study until they know it's going to work.
well, yeah, but I think that having more than just a feasibility study is really important, because we are giving them time. We are giving them extra time. It will all be laid out in statute. What the parameters are, it literally will be in the state law. So they will know what they have to take into consideration when they're trying to figure out what the plan might be. So
but what they don't know that they've just said is, if we just extend, and the PUC has said, well, to do a new rate hearing, if you're only going to do it for 5 years, cost benefit doesn't work. If what they won't know is the rate, which probably might affect their financial dealings, but they won't know how many months of the year they're going to be allowed to operate. Because right now.
Yeah.
But the PUC could take that into consideration when they're setting.
Yeah, that's what
they've made a deal with the wood pellet company and they need to be operating, 50 weeks a year, then that would be part of the provisions.
Say a detailed feasibility study. I mean, so that when the PUC looks at this, they know that wood pellets are feasible if the dispatch allows the plant to run X number of weeks a year. And that if they only allow it a smaller number, then that feasibility doesn't work. However, this other thing might work better. One of them may have better emissions than the other. But I think the PUC needs to know, there needs to be a study, and the PUC needs to know what kind of criteria they're going to need to put in order to make that study work. Does that make sense to anyone but me? Senator Pearson, you're back.
I haven't left. And by the way, I do have to ask you, I don't know what I'm supposed to tell Approbes because I'm not sure we made a decision on broadband, but setting that aside.
I have no idea what they're talking about.
They'd like our recommendation for money on broadband.
Wait,
Senator,
I sent that to them, the detailed notes that,
well, could you send that to me? Then I'll go help them.
I sent you the notes, Chris. I sent the whole committee the notes.
All right,
yeah,
I'll
you
look for
got
that.
them. It was
Thank you.
1.6. And Jane's got it because she told her Torme and all the folks that
You
have.
wanted me to walk. Maybe we should send Senator Hardy.
I'll go if
so-
it lasts.
Sorry, I'll stay focused.
I'd rather talk about that than this, maybe. I'll go.
Yeah.
I like what Senator Hardy's saying in concept. It's not a study. I mean, the theory of it, all of it's possible. It's more like find out what's feasible and get that sort of underway. Not shovels in the ground, but contracts of, yes, we want to do this, assuming the PUC gives us a price of this, we can do it. You know, that to me,
Okay,
I don't
so
know.
you just put the assuming in there. Assuming that the PUC lets us operate 11 months of the year, we can do this.
yeah.
What they're saying is we don't know until we get that next formal hearing if they're going to let us
this
do
is a
that.
chicken and an egg thing, and
I
we've had
know.
this discussion a decade ago. So shame on us if we allow ourselves
Must
to
have
do
been
it
in the
again.
House. I don't remember this discussion.
We passed this bill a decade ago, and I promise you, if people weren't
I
talking
wasn't
about
here.
co-location then I'd be stunned. So my point is, there's a feasibility piece, but what I'd be interested in is more than that. It is not the theory of it, but the relationships, the partnerships that are interested. By
Okay,
the end of
so
this,
you want a name, not just we could
yeah.
find
by the end of
somebody,
this,
but that
Dylan-
we have talked to X wood chip company, an X shrimp farm company, an X haberdasher who wants to dry their felt hats with our heat.
these
and-
are, these are not
Okay,
these are not sort of garage businesses. These folks
right.
can understand what they would be bringing forward to make it realistic. My question for Ellen is, what I haven't heard is how we hinge this sort of whatever we ask for on the future, because and maybe Senator McDonald has an idea there, because there's this trick of, do we just say you can do this for a couple of years and then if you have X, you can go to the PUC? Or I need to understand that trigger point.
Well, I think we're extending the present license for an unnamed number of years. That when that license runs out, they are to come into the PUC with a detailed or find a word for it, feasibility or feasibilities study. And the PUC at that point will do a full-blown rate hearing. They will be able to take in the value of having a wood pellet plant versus a chicken farm versus whatever, and make the decision about the value and the way they set the rates and the dispatch and everything else. Is that what we're looking for?
An answer to that question, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Were we to extend the present law for 2 years, the company could pursue or not pursue all the items that we suggested in the proposed bill, and anything else that they think of that might be useful or that crops up or comes to their attention. And we should make it clear in this legislation that nothing prohibits them from coming back to the legislature sooner than 3 years and 3 months. If they've got something that's percolating, by golly, they can come in and come to us and say, we want to get moving and shaking. And you don't have to wait until then. And then we will take the advice of the PUC and we'll listen to what's being proposed. And who's ever here will make a decision that, wow, send them on their great idea, go ahead, or great idea, PUC, you handle it, or great idea, something else. But they have the time to do that. And if we can speculate on what may or may not be proposed, but when it's proposed, that's when the decision should be made, and we should be open. And this legislation should be open to dealing with it in a timely fashion when they come back with it.
Okay, I am going to move us on to the next item. Welcome to Crunch. Ellen, can you talk with Dylan and
Greg.
Yeah, Greg, see if you can put this in English that maybe not the average person, but the average drafter can understand. I think we want something that says we're going to extend your license for 2 years unless somebody says that's totally unrealistic. It has to be 3, and that's from the 2022 date. So you got a year or so more running on this one. We're going to extend your license. During that time, you develop a detailed, specific feasibility study with names of actual interested parties to bring to the PUC for approval and then for formal rate hearing. That if this develops earlier, please come see the legislature. Well, I don't even know.
Well, I guess the question is, who do you want them to bring the feasibility study to? It sounds like you actually want it to come to you.
Yeah.
Who do we want it to come to?
To the General Assembly, so then the General Assembly can then decide whether or not you want to extend the year in statute.
All right, Senator Sirotkin.
I just have confused a little bit with this concept of the feasibility study and what Dylan has suggested. I mean, certainly any kind of contracts that are written can have contingency language, and PUC could look at it to make sure it's not, they're not shams. But I don't understand why we even need the feasibility. Why can't we just go to what Dylan suggested?
Okay.
Do it
I
at
agree.
2 or 3 years and let's get going. Let's get on with it.
Okay. All right. That works. Change his 5 years to 3 years. Senator Bray. Okay. Senator Brock is shaking his head. Senator Bray.
Yep.
Come on, we got to go on to local options here.
Thanks. So the shorter timeline sounds great. I wanted to follow up with one other thing we haven't talked about, and that was it may or may not be part of the current CPGs, but I would like it to be explicit that this plant operate with a procurement standard so that it controls the operations of what it buys. And the advantage of a procurement standard is it's an obligation of the operator. So whether they're buying in state or out of a state, they still need to purchase from logging operations that are managed to whatever we call it, a higher standard.
Okay, so we want a procurement standard that enforces good forestry products, and we want preference given to Vermont loggers. Does that get us moving forward? That was Senator McDonald.
Yeah, that was on my list too. And Chris,
yes or no, Senator McDonald?
Commissioner Snyder was delighted at the opportunity to present during any extension ideas of how to do that, to be accepted or rejected by the plant.
Can we either leave it moot at this point, or do we put in preference to Vermont loggers, Senator? Yes or no, up, down, that's your signal.
I would just caution, I haven't looked into that issue, but you have to be very careful providing a out-of-state preference over in-state with the Commerce Clause. So I haven't actually analyzed that.
Okay, so let's just leave it out for now.
Okay.
All right. Okay. I'm going to send Ellen and Dylan and Greg to draft something. If we can get over this hurdle, I think we can get this thing out by tomorrow. Okay, we're going to go on now to a brand new bill. I'm looking at cannabis. That was yesterday. No, that was 2 days ago. Here we go. S-111, which arrived this week. And Tucker, why don't you walk us through this one? We're all going to take a deep breath. Okay. This is when we need Hinda and
You may hear a few ums during my walkthrough.
Oh dear.
There you go. There's the first. Good afternoon, everyone. Tucker Anderson with Legislative Counsel. S-111 contains mostly deletions that require a little bit of context if you're not familiar with local option taxes under general law. 24 VSA Section 138 provides general access to local option taxes for municipalities that meet certain specific standards that were established between 1997 and 1999. Approximately 47 towns meet those standards. They're fairly technical and deal with certain financial reports that came out during that time about the tax revenue of those municipalities. If you are one of those municipalities that meets those standards, you can propose a local option tax that will be approved by the voters. That can cover a 1% sales tax, a 1% meals and alcoholic beverages tax, or a 1% rooms tax. It is administered along with the Department of Taxes. 30% of the revenue from local option taxes goes to the pilot fund, and 70% goes to municipality. There are some a per return fee that is split 30-70 between the municipality and the state. That covers most of the procedures around local option taxes. The only other way that a municipality can currently get approval for a local option tax is through a municipal charter. S-111 proposes to eliminate all of the qualifications in subsection A of 24 VSA Section 138 and allow any municipality in the state to propose and then approve through their voters a local option tax, again, on sales, meals and alcoholic beverages, or rooms.
And piece of history. Local options taxes came in. I remember yesterday I said there was an argument that the state took the property tax when we did Act 60, and therefore we should be willing to share some of our taxing authority in the form of rooms and meals with the local municipalities. The financial standards were set up so that it were towns. In those days, they were called gold towns, the towns that under Act 60 paid in more than they got back. It was a lot of the ski towns, a lot of towns with second homes or a lot of businesses. But that was the original. It was very limited. And Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the original. Yeah. I personally brought the Montpelier rooms and meals tax up here twice.
Yes, no, I'm agreeing.
That it never got taken up as a charter change. And so we had the proposal for cannabis yesterday. This basically says, if your voters want to put a local tax in, they can vote to do that. And so be it. I did start collecting my hotel receipts, mostly when I went to NCOIL meetings, just to record how many towns and charged additional rooms and meals tax. There'd be a municipal, there were lots of charges on there, but most of them had a county or a municipal and a state tax on at least your room. So that's the history as I remember it. Tucker, is there anything else? People are bouncing all over this place. Did I lose Tucker?
No,
I am still here, but
You're
you
here.
are all frozen for me.
Oh.
So maybe I should turn my video off. I have nothing else
Well,
to add. You did an excellent job of summarizing
moving,
the
but I
history.
think everybody else is frozen and usually I need to leave and check back in. So let me try that. Wait, I
Senator
need,
Cummings, you're moving on my screen. You're
I'm
fine.
moving. Okay, all right, but
As was Tucker, actually, for me. So who
Tucker
knows
Tucker
what
was
it means.
moving on mine, but I think Steve and Senator McDonald and Senator Sirotkin are frozen. And
Well,
usually if I check the
they're all moving
connect
now.
button, they're all moving now? No,
I'm
they
moving,
aren't.
but thaw me out.
You're not moving on my screen.
Hey,
And
Madam Chair, can I ask a clarifying question of,
Yeah, and you're
Whoever.
blank on my screen, so.
oh, sorry.
The
No,
ghost of
I
Senator
just-
Hardy.
All of a sudden, everybody went blank here. And usually I could just click out and reconnect to my internet, but looks like I have to leave the meeting. So,
Who
no,
knows what
now
Senator
Senator
McDonald's-
Hardy is frozen.
All right.
Okay, I'm gonna leave and come back in.
Okay, I'm gonna ask my question while you're gone.
Okay, I
so-
hope whoever,
Steve or Tucker, I was trying to follow what Senator Cummings was saying about the history of this, but did I understand her correctly? It was a prohibition so that gold towns could not or could do a local option tax. You're muted, Steve.
Yes, it's a long time ago. Boy, a lot of dark screens here. No, it was to give the gold, what within the gold towns, the option to do a local option tax so that they could make back some of the money locally. It was sort of part of the Act 60 thing. So it was not the prohibition. It was the whole local
Just the
option was
gold
limited
towns.
to certain towns. They're no longer called
Just
that.
gold
No, I
This is
know,
100 years ago.
but it's the classic example is Stowe and Killington and places, the ski resort towns are the ones that people usually cite. So it was allowing them to have a local option tax to make up for what they either actually or perceived to lose under Act 60.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was that correct. Actually, Senator McDonald was there at the time, and maybe, I don't know if he wants to chime in and give his perception.
The vote in the Senate was divided 16-14. That proposal got us a majority.
Okay, so it was basically part of the compromise to, okay, all right. I was just curious because I think I was hearing it backwards and it didn't make sense in my head. So I understand.
It has since been expanded, but at that time it was gold towns only, and that was secured a majority vote.
Okay, and S111 would just get rid of any kind of division, and it would be any town could propose and approve a local option tax. Would they-
I believe that's correct. That has to be after.
Would they still have to come for a charter change, or is it just a local vote?
I'm not qualified to answer that question.
Well, I'm asking Tucker, actually,
Okay.
Senator McDonald.
Excellent. Good.
If you qualified under the general statute, you did not have to go through the charter adoption or amendment process. You could just hold the local vote. And at one point, the Department of Taxes did have, I think, a mostly accurate list of those towns that could adopt their local option tax through the general statute.
No, but I mean, under S111.
Oh, they would not have to come back.
Okay, so anybody
would-
could do it and it would just be a local vote. It would not, okay, that's what I was
Correct.
curious about. Thanks.
Okay, I am back, but I'm on my iPad, so,
We lightened the load while you're out of the room. We voted out S1.
oh, good, okay, let's keep going then. We're on a roll. How about this one? This is relatively simple. Senator Sirotkin, Now you're muted, Senator.
I'm laughing because you read my mind. I was just going to ask the question. It seems like this bill was just introduced yesterday, and it seems like raises a lot of questions. And I'm wondering, is there some sort of sense of urgency that we're dealing with? I don't know how I feel about it without hearing more, but I'm just surprised a bill that was introduced yesterday is under a deadline of tomorrow.
Well, we seem to have a rash. There were about a dozen Senate bills that were introduced this week as new bills. I'm not sure where the bottleneck is. Usually, Senator Luzzi had about 100 bills the first day.
Right.
And then, but most bills were in like that first week or two. And the cannabis bill came to us the Friday we left for break. So,
I mean, I'm sure we're going to hear from other witnesses, and maybe it's not any more complex or politicized than it might appear. But we, as you put out, at this point, we have a heavy agenda, and I don't know.
We do. I wanted us to at least know what this one was. This is one we could potentially put on a miscellaneous tax bill if it heads this way.
Okay.
So, you know, we can try that and see where it goes. I've lost my agenda because I'm now on my iPad. So let me find it.
Tucker, Ben Karen, Horn, then Steve Klein.
Okay, well, we got Tucker. Karen, why don't you join us? And then we've got Steve.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much. Needless to say, we strongly support this legislation. Just as a bit of background, in addition to it having been passed initially as part of Act 60, the Senate has passed this bill several times in the past, and it's gotten stalled in the House Ways and Means Committee. So we would urge you to pass it again. There are some different members in the Ways and Means Committee. We might have more of a substantial conversation around it. What happens with most of the towns that apply for a local option is that they go through the charter change process. And even if they were originally a gold town, some of those towns have taken the avenue of going through the local option, of going through the charter change process as well. Right now, there are 17 towns that have a local option sales tax, and there are 21 towns that have a local option meals, rooms, and or alcohol tax. The very interesting thing is that it used to be the case that if you were a small town with not much commercial base in your community, you might not benefit from a local option sales tax. But in the wake of the Wayfair decision, and particularly in the wake of the pandemic shutdown, where everybody is buying everything online and those FedEx and UPS trucks are going overtime throughout the state, where the package lands is where the sales tax is assessed. So in some communities that have not in the past had the opportunity possibly to gain some revenue from a local option tax, they are rethinking that. Two towns that had local option tax on their ballot this year are Londonderry and Montgomery, kind of surprising small communities. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you is that the way the local option tax is set up, and Tucker mentioned this as well, is that 70% is retained at the local level and 30% goes to pay for the payment in lieu of taxes from the state to towns for buildings and for buildings that are state-owned in your communities. So that those payments are entirely out of the pilot fund from the local option tax revenues. And just to be perfectly clear, there is also a payment in lieu of taxes from the Agency of Natural Resources for lands that is not paid out of the this pot of money, but the other ones are. So again, we would strongly support making this available to everyone now. It seems to us that the decision has been made that towns may assess local option taxes. It's also clear to us that it does not affect the revenues of the state and has not in any respect. So we would urge your support. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Sirotkin.
I'm here.
No,
I'm
you
here.
had your hand up, I thought.
Oh, no, I was wiping away a flea.
Ah,
Sorry.
okay. Just for Chittenden County, Burlington has always had a local meals and alcohol tax because your charter says you can regulate places of victual.
And
So-
Rutland has that same
they?
provision in there. Yes.
Okay. So you didn't have to do any of this. Okay, any questions for Karen? Okay, Steve. And Faith, can you send me the sign in numbers again? I am not finding them.
Will do.
And then I can try and get back in on my computer and I will have my other screen free. Okay, Steve.
I think Steve's going to delegate the testimony to me.
Oh, he's going to delegate it to you. Okay.
Yeah. I'm Graham Campbell from the Joint Fiscal Office. Steve and I have reviewed the bill. We should have a couple of comments. The first is, I think we generally agree with Ms. Sworn that the impact on the state revenue wise from a tax perspective is minimal. You know, I think that the impact largely trickles into the pilot fund and how much money gets put into the pilot. So for instance, if you have more towns picking or taking on local options taxes, then the pilot fund is going to receive more revenue. And so to the extent that the pilot fund begins to be potentially overfunded, that could be something just to keep an eye on. And then the other thing that I was thinking about was the Department of Taxes charges, I think something like $5.96 a return for local state or towns with local option taxes. I think it would be wise to have the department in to discuss whether they see any need to add positions or add any sort of administrative capacity. Because right now there are, I'm trying to look at my list here. There are, as of fiscal year 19, 16 towns had a local option sales tax and 23 had a local option meals and rooms. About 15 towns had both. So,
Oh, that's me. I'm leaving one and I'm on the computer. All right, I'm back.
So I think those are the two sort of things that we would flag unless Steve has anything else.
Sure. I'll just jump in and add a little bit more to that. Just to give you a sense, the only thing I would just say is the concern about revenues of the state is it is taxing capacity. And so, you know, if we do make that has been one of the things that's come up a lot. It's just, are we expanding this in a way that will take future state taxing capacity? But aside from that, the pilot fund currently is funding about 82% of the full pilot value. So we're getting to the point this is over time growing. Like in 2015, we were funding about 69% of pilot value. So we're now up to 82, which is good. You know, you'd like to be fully funding pilot. So I think Graham's point, there will come, if assuming towns participate, more towns participate, there is a chance you could get up to 100%. There's also a chance you could fund, as Karen mentioned, the A&R pilot or something else out of this fund. There'll be decisions to be made in about in a few years with this, if it's added money. But otherwise, it doesn't affect. Nothing in this would affect the sort of calculation in this bill. It still would be 70%, and the other 30% would go to the pilot fund, as I read the bill.
Okay, I've got Senator Pearson, then Senator Hardy.
I guess I'm curious that a lot of the, and I say this representing several towns with the local options tax, so I just want to play this out a little bit. A lot of the debate around the current structure has been for Montpelier, for Burlington, people come into town. They come from away, they're from out of state, they're certainly from out of town. And so they're using services, and this is a way to have that sort of reflected in a sense of the impact on the community. And I guess I ask that because the sales tax is inherently regressive, and who is paying it starts to impact kind of just how regressive. If it's a bunch of tourists, maybe we're a little less worried about the justice of the tax. But what we're talking about here would seem to me to change that. It would be just really another source of revenue for towns, and we need them to get revenue. I appreciate that. But I wonder if anybody could comment about that. Am I totally wrong in the way I'm thinking of it? Or is there anything to that as a shift of the principle of where we've been coming from?
I would say that it really it depends in terms of the dynamic of whether you're exporting your if tourists are paying the majority of your local options tax. It really just depends on what they're buying. So, you know, things like groceries and clothing are exempt from the sales tax. And so a large portion of our sales tax revenues come from, well, A, online purchases, but B, very large purchases, durable goods, things from like hardware stores or appliances, computers, things that are large, expensive types of things. And you see that sort of backed up in the data. I mean, we did some internal research looking at local options taxes last year, and you know, it's towns like Williston and Colchester which collect the most local options taxes. And, you know, I don't know to the extent those are tourist destinations, but they rely, you know, pretty heavily, their budgets rely heavily on those taxes. There are towns like Stowe and Dover that do, and Woodstock that do, you know, have local option tax revenue. It's not nearly as an important source of revenue for those towns. But, you know, that's the sort of exporting thing. But I think it does depend upon the types of things that they're buying. The other thing too is that's for sales tax, but on meals and rooms tax and alcohol taxes, those ones are largely paid by tourists, particularly in those towns where they are. I think the stat is that rooms taxes are almost always are completely paid by tourists by nature. Meals taxes are about 50-ish% for Vermont as a whole, but in those towns it's probably much higher. And the alcohol tax is the same thing. It's probably much higher in the towns that have local option meals and rooms taxes.
Okay. Senator Hardy.
Thank you. I think it's a good point what Senator Pearson just brought up, and I hadn't actually thought about it. So some little town that doesn't have hotels and motels and bars and stuff would do a pilot tax based on sales tax. And, you know, Williston and the towns you mentioned, Graham, are sort of big box towns where they have stores that are, you know, selling a lot of that stuff. But the little towns that don't have those kinds of stores would be taxing their own residents for buying things online, more or less. But so I hadn't thought of that. It's a good point to consider. But I have a question, two questions. Steve, you mentioned the split, the 70%, 30% for the pilot. So 30% of a local options tax either kind of local options tax goes to the pilot fund. And
Yes,
70% goes to the local town.
yeah,
And the pilot fund is used to pay payment in lieu of taxes from the state to
correct.
towns all over the state.
Yeah,
So there's not a one-to-one thing like your pilot. Okay. So that's my first question. The second question is, what is the local, I should know this because we have one of these in my town, the local approval for a pilot tax? Is it a ballot initiative? Or is it just the select board voting for it?
Karen, do you want to?
Everybody's frozen
the-
again.
The municipality has to put it on the ballot, has to be voted at the local level. And so you actually have a couple of instances where in Killington, they adopted a sales tax and then a couple years later, they rescinded it.
Okay, so it's just like any other ballot initiative. It would go on
Yes.
town meeting day and there would be, it's on, the whole town votes on it and it's Australian
Yes.
ballot vote.
Well, if you could vote it from the floor if that's what your town does.
Okay,
But this year, the two were Australian ballot.
okay. And is there, are there things that the town can stipulate it be used for, or is it just for broad purposes for the town? Like, I'm thinking in my town in Middlebury, I think we did one that's paying for a bridge.
Yes.
Yeah,
And in Colchester, they dedicated the revenues to economic development efforts. So a town can constrain the revenues to a particular purpose.
okay. That's what I thought. All right, thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, committee, any questions, comments? Oh, all right, Senator Hardy, you're unfrozen, but everybody else is frozen, but I can hear them. So you'll have to holler or put up your yellow hand because I can't, you're not moving. Anyway, other than, well, either way, it's going to run to Ways and Means. We've got this, and then this also is in the cannabis bill, and they both came to us very late. So we could either just vote this out and send it on its way, or we could hold both this and cannabis and stick them on the miscellaneous tax bill. I'm just looking at time. So I'm going to give you, we're running late again. I'm going to give you a 15-minute break unless somebody wants to make a motion to approve this bill at this point. Didn't think so. So I'm going to give you a 15-minute break and be back here at 3:25. And we'll start. Randy, we're going to try and walk through yours. The nurse licensure compact can get kicked, but I'd like to at least have agreement on what we're going to vote on tomorrow on both S60, which is the munis and flexible rates, and on Rygate. So then we can come back and vote those tomorrow. I think we're close on Rygate, so I'm going to walk through that rather than do nurse licensure. And then hopefully we're close on the munis. And then we can give Ellen a break. Okay. So be back 3:25 and I'll see you. And I'm going to try and get, well, Randy's moving now, so.
I'm here.
You're there. No, people keep freezing on my screen. I can hear them, but they're just frozen.
Live stream